A lot of times when we're working on a proof, the objective is to prove that two triangles are congruent. But sometimes we're just going to prove the two triangles congruent in order to prove other information as well. In congruent triangles, corresponding parts of those congruent triangles are congruent. So, for example, in this triangle, angle A corresponds to angle D, so they're congruent to each other. Also, angle C corresponds to angle F, so these are congruent. And then angle E corresponds to angle B. These are congruent. Likewise, side EF is across from D, and BC is across from A, so BC and EF correspond to each other. Therefore, BC is congruent to EF. Side AB and side DE correspond to each other. They're congruent because angle C and angle F are congruent, and these are the sides across from them. That's when we know they correspond to each other because they're in the same position on the triangles. And AC is congruent to DF. So when we're writing proofs, we're going to have our statement and reason chart. So we're going to have a whole bunch of information. Then maybe step 7, we might have that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. And let's just pretend that we knew or we proved that A is congruent to D, F is congruent to C, and that AC is congruent to DF. So if we prove that, then we're going to prove these two triangles congruent using angle, side angle. But the important thing is, after we prove that, we can show a lot of things. So we could list any of these other corresponding parts of this triangle as being congruent, because we know corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So after this step, which normally is our last step, we can prove that side AB is congruent to DE. So AB congruent to DE, and our reason is simply corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And we could use this for a number of things. We could also prove that angle B is congruent to angle E for the same reason. And we can also show that BC is congruent to EF because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So sometimes proving that the two triangles are congruent is an intermediate step in order to get to another proof about line segments or angles, or possibly even this information we use to prove different triangles, or maybe rhombuses or squares or anything else are congruent.